Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach, and welcome to episode 198, quote, paraphrase, or citation string. I've been teaching a lot of writing classes this semester, and one of the questions that comes up for both graduate students and undergraduates is how to decide when to use a quotation, when to use a paraphrase, and when to use a citation string. And what I mean by that, when we think through all of those possibilities for incorporating source material, is to think through some just basic reasons as to why you want to use these individual sources. So one of the episodes we did a while back, that's one of our popular episodes, is on reasons for source support. And so if you're going to quote or paraphrase or have a parenthetical at the end of a sentence with a bunch of citations in there, meaning a whole bunch of other research studies did something similar to yours, or it's a line of inquiry that you want to represent through some studies. One of the things that we talked about in that past episode, and I will link to it in the show notes, is that you really need to know why sources are in any scholarly writing that you are doing in the first place. So if you're writing a scholarly article, sources might show up in a number of places. They might show up in the introduction where they serve as background. They might show up in your literature review when you're trying to establish a theme in the literature about your topic. They might show up in the methodology, where in the methodology, maybe there's one method that you're going to use and you want to cite who invented the method or who has really, developed maybe a framework that you're using or a theoretical lens. That's a way to cite a source. I've mentioned this in a free webinar we did a little while back about scholarly reading. And we even talked about having a source that maybe gives a call for action. Like somebody says, well, we need to do something about this problem. You might cite that source as a rationale or a reason why you want to, your study exists. You want to do something about it. So all of those are reasons. And then, of course, you might have a source that's the thing you're actually studying. So that would be a reason why you're using that source in your paper. But when we get down to it, then once we've decided what sources we want to use in our project, we have to decide how much or how little to take from these sources or to represent in our paper. So the way that I present this, and I've talked to actually a lot of our clients about this recently, because it's kind of tough to make the call. Our impetus, and this is something we probably see with our undergraduate students a lot, but the impetus is to quote because somebody said something so amazing that made sense and in such a great way that you can't possibly say something similar. So you want to use the quote. And so what happens a lot of times, and this, we'll see this more in undergraduate work, but also in some faculty clients that we're working with, you get essentially an information dump where there's a lot of quotes, but very little of you or your personal voice as a scholar. And so the way that I try to think through this a little bit is, again, getting back to that function a little bit. When I try to think through, when am I going to actually use a quote? Yes, sometimes I'm using a quote because somebody said something so amazing that there's not really a better way to say it. I mean, we could say that about lots of scholarship. So the temptation, of course, is to oversight. And so the way that I make sure that I don't do that is I have a really narrow bandwidth for what is able to be quoted. And so the way that I kind of make that distinction is that, let's say my argument is something along the lines of academic motherhood is time consuming, because that was a recent project that I worked on. Maybe that's the argument that I want to make. Well, if I'm going to take a quote, I'm probably not going to take one about academic caregiving because I want to focus on motherhood. I also am probably only going to take an actual quote that has something to do with time. So I'm tying together some cornerstones in my actual topic. So one way I kind of weed out unnecessary quotes is I only use quotes if it's hitting basically all the big things happening in my topic. If that quote doesn't have anything to do with any of those big things, or maybe only hits one, maybe it's better as a paraphrase. So, restated in your own words is the way, we always present this in kind of a simple way. Maybe it's better paraphrased rather than quoted. The quote is only if it's hitting kind of all the cornerstones. Another thing that I think about with a quote, because this is where I think people have the tough time. Do I actually use a real quote versus, a paraphrase or a parenthetical citation, which I'll talk about in a second. But another way that I make sure that I know why I'm using certain quotes is that I need them to do something in the essay. And it's not just having the function of a source being like a piece of background, but usually a quote has to do something else. So is it confirming what I am also arguing? Is it saying what I'm arguing in a different way? So I'm trying to present it to my readers through maybe two different ways to think about an issue. Is it an actual, for example, I mentioned a call for action. If it's a call for action and it says very concretely that we need to do something about a certain problem, I will probably quote that because you can do a citation string for those kinds of calls. So a sentence like that would say something like, multiple calls to respond to X have been featured in recent literature. And then you have a parenthetical with like lots of citations. But a quote, a lot of times, if I can find somebody that has actually made a call, that can be a reason for a quote. Other ways that I sometimes use quotes would be if I'm thinking through maybe participants or faculty citations about how they feel about writing. All my writing at the moment is all about faculty writing and scholarship. So anything that's related to feelings, I find that it's really difficult to capture feelings in paraphrase. So sometimes I can get some good quotes that are about how someone's feeling for whatever reason, and that is a reason why I'm quoting. Now, that said, a lot of quotes are really long and they eat up a lot of room in your paper and then take away from your own scholarly voice. So one of the other things that I will do with them is I will look and see what is strictly necessary out of this quoted material. Do I want to use an ellipses to cut down that material and make it a little bit shorter? So that might be something that I will look at. Everything else that I know I want to capture an individual scholar's opinion, but I don't need a quote to do it, that for me goes in that paraphrase bucket. So when I'm talking about a paraphrase versus like a long string of citations, meaning a parenthetical at the end of the sentence with like lots of different sources cited, the big difference for me with a paraphrase is that I'm really working with one person's ideas. I'm just not quoting them. That would be a reason why I might use the paraphrase. And then the last one for a citation string, generally, if I want to represent that a body of literature is out there, or a lot of people have used a certain method to, for example, measure time use, because that's something that I look at. If I'm trying to basically establish that a conversation exists, that tends to be why I would use what I would call a citation string, where I have a parenthetical at the end of the sentence with a couple of different sources in it. I'm not working with one individual source, but I'm just saying that, hey, all of these sources have done this one thing. They've all cited the need for more faculty writing support, or they have all said scholarly reading is something neglected, or whatever it is that they do. So the difference, again, for me to think about this through a paraphrase and a citation string is just, am I working with one individual idea, or am I working with more of a discussion, a theme, a conversation that several people have done? So this is kind of a quick drive-by, set of strategies to think through. Do I need a quote in this? Do I need a paraphrase? Do I need a citation string as you're writing? And our podcast episodes are certainly designed to give some quick ways that you might make some decisions about your writing so you can keep going. But I also want to point you in a way, if you are interested in how to do this, maybe in a little bit more detail, we do for November, our upcoming November workshop is on getting your reading into your scholarly writing. And we did a free webinar on this that gave a little bit of an overview. But in this case, in this particular workshop, it's just a 1-hour workshop. We are going to work with the actual writing that you're doing and figuring out how sources are functioning in there, and then how any notes on your sources go into your writing. Because a lot of times when we take notes on sources, there's a kernel of a really good idea in there, or a sentence in there, or something that you actually have already created that needs to then make the jump from maybe notes on the margin of an article or notes in a notebook to the actual writing that you're doing. And this all gets back to thinking through, what are the functions of the sources I have? Do I want to quote? Do I want to paraphrase? Do I want to do a citation string? And so we're going to show a lot of those differences when we look at those three things together to try to determine how to make sure that they all function in a source effectively. So hopefully you'll join us for that one. And as always, if you have any questions about that, you can find that link in our show notes on Eventbrite. Also, you can use a discount code. So if you are interested in attending one, if you use the code READ, capital READ, you can get a discount off of the registration for that one. But it's a really good workshop to get reading into your writing right there in the session. Also, as always, with all of our Eventbrite events, we always record them. So if you're somebody that likes to do these workshops or webinars on your own time, everybody who registers will get a copy of the recording. Happy writing this week.